Today's case is about the disappearance of Connie Gaudet. This happened in February 1984, and for 8 years it was all a mystery until her remains were found, which allowed her case to be linked to a culprit. This isn't a very long case, but I found it very interesting because it's one of those stories that are studied in law schools. That's why I thought it was interesting to share. Connie was 23 years old at the time of her disappearance. The last time she was seen was at her home, located in the city of Lockport, in the state of Louisiana. Connie had married Dale Goddard in September 1978, and by 1984, they'd been married 6 years and had 2 daughters. The oldest was 4 years old, and the next one, the youngest, was only 1 year old. And speaking about the youngest, she was about to turn 2 years old a week after the disappearance. So Connie was getting everything ready for her daughter's birthday at that time. But let's go to February 18, 1984. It was a Friday, and Connie had come back from work at around 6:30 p.m. But before getting home, she obviously went to pick up her 2 daughters who were being taken care of by her mother, Connie's mother, the girls' grandmother. This lady, the grandmother of the girls, always took care of the 2 girls from Monday to Friday because the parents went out to work. It's not like they had a lot of money. So, well, Connie's mom helped with that from Monday to Friday. On the weekends, the girls stayed at home. After picking up the girls, she went home with her daughters. Apparently, it had been a normal night, and the next day, her husband named Dale said he woke up at 7 in the morning because the house phone started ringing. And according to his statement, this was a statement he made to the police. According to his statement, that call was from Connie. Connie was on the other end of the phone. And Connie supposedly told him that she had gone out with a friend. This wasn't the first time Connie called the house to say something like that. We're talking about the 80s. There were no cell phones. Connie sometimes, according to her husband's statement, would leave earlier to do things with acquaintances or family members and didn't want to wake her husband. So she used to call when she thought her husband would already be awake. Also, we have to take into account that that day, when the call was made that morning at 7 a.m., it was a Saturday. And Dale used to sleep longer on weekends because he worked a lot during the week. All of this according to the husband's statement. Dale mentioned that he woke up, saw that 2 suitcases were missing from the house, and that Connie had taken most of her dresses. And he knew very well why Connie decided to leave at that moment. This was not a surprise to him. Not long before, Connie had found out that her husband was having an extramarital affair with a woman named Donna Forret. This information, which he would later tell the saying, "Le contaría a la policía," began to make sense in light of other details from the investigation. Connie, being angry with her husband, might have started talking to a man named Ted. Yes, T-E-D, Ted.
Sí, T-E-D, Ted.
This, apparently, was revenge for the affair her husband was having. And that's all that was known about Connie. That was the last thing, the last known movements, the call that her husband had reported, that the suitcases were missing. After that, nothing else was known. Until the day after this disappearance, Connie's mother received a letter. And this letter was from her daughter, saying that she was with this man named Ted and that she would be back soon. We don't really know if the family was aware of all this. We're talking about the husband's affair and also about Connie, who was with this man. Well, with the letter they found out she was with this man, but we don't know if they previously knew about both affairs. I don't know if that makes sense. But what we can say is that the family, from the very beginning, was worried. Connie didn't seem emotionally stable in the last few months. So, the fact that she was with an unknown person was concerning. Dale was also worried, but he was trying to keep the family calm and didn't share much information because he knew that then he would have to talk about the affair. Something he didn't want Connie's family to find out about, at least not at that moment. Dale claimed that he spoke on the phone with his wife at least twice when she was upset, and that at one point she went to the house for a few minutes to get something and then left again. On February 21, her disappearance was officially reported to the authorities. After hearing Dale's account and the family's, that is, everything we just mentioned Dale said, plus what the family said about Connie's emotional state, authorities thought there might not be much to investigate or care about. It seemed like a voluntary disappearance. Likewise, they started verifying the accounts. Indeed, they confirmed that 2 suitcases were missing from the house, and also that Connie's closet wasn't full, meaning that some clothes had been taken from that closet. They also confirmed that Dale was having this affair, and everything seemed to fit. Dale wasn't himself, and so it was considered that maybe Connie needed some time alone, or with this man who was probably comforting her at that point. The house didn't look messy, and since there was no sign of a possible murder, they didn't investigate much in the place where Connie had last been seen. The important thing for the authorities at that moment was to try to locate her and find this man named Ted. Neither the family nor the friends, not even the husband, knew who this Ted was. They knew him by name because of the letter and because the wife mentioned this to Dale. But no one had ever seen him in person. They didn't know what he looked like, and they didn't know how he knew Connie. The only evidence they had at that point, that the authorities had, was the letter that the mother had received. This letter was taken to a laboratory even though DNA testing didn't exist at that time. They could analyze the handwriting and the components of the letter to confirm important details for the investigation. But this took time, so while they waited for the results, the authorities questioned the people around her. But no one else saw her, nor did they know anything about her or the disappearance. Something that the family said. They said that she would never leave her daughters, even if she had been mentally broken. For the police, there were several lines of investigation to follow. First was the husband. He is always the main suspect in similar cases. Then there's the mysterious man that Connie had left with, named Ted, who could be someone dangerous and might have harmed her. It could also be that Connie decided to make a drastic decision because of the depression she was feeling and made up that she was with a man. And these are 3 possibilities out of many more. When the results of the letter came in, they were able to confirm several things. First, that the letter had been sent from a post office in the same city of Lockport, Louisiana. The second thing was that the handwriting didn't match Connie's, so it must have been someone else. And the third thing they confirmed was that it couldn't be verified that it was the husband's handwriting. This suggested that maybe it had been this man named Ted, the mysterious man with whom apparently she was spending time and who had confirmed it. She had met him recently, just a few months ago we can say, and to be honest, it seemed like she was using him to get back at her husband. So this man named Ted could have easily found out that she was using him. A fight started that ended in a tragic way. Obviously, this is just a guess. For years they tried to locate Ted, without success, and Connie's disappearance went cold. The authorities believed that maybe Ted wasn't his real name, but rather a fake name that this person used to cover up his crimes. It just so happened that in Louisiana, several women were turning up dead, and these murders were being linked to one another. I mean, it seemed like the work of a killer who, no. Deborah Ann Ford was 25 years old. She was found dead in her home in the city of Shepherdport, Louisiana on July 19, 1985. It was the multiple murder of the Cheney Colbert family, in which the victims were Vivian Cheney, 34 years old, Billy Joe Harris, 28, Carlita Colbert, 15 years old, and Jerry Colbert, 25. These murders began in 1984, which was the year of Connie's disappearance, and continued until 1987. And there were many cases, like Connie's, where the bodies were found, but it was believed they could be by the same perpetrator. There were also other cases like Monica Burnman, Burnman Westberg, and Johnny Jenkins. There was also another one named Jake Mills, which were confirmed murders that had certain similar patterns but couldn't be linked 100%. So there were confirmed victims that people said had to be the work of the same person, and others that were similar. Disappearances and murders, including that of Connie. These murders and disappearances were the responsibility of a man named Nathaniel Coate, who is considered one of the worst serial killers in Louisiana. And they were only able to try him for the multiple murder of that family, committed on July 19, 1985 we mentioned a while ago. Therefore, the other victims did not receive justice, but Nathaniel was still sentenced to death and was executed in 1990. Thus, Connie's case, as well as those of other people who might have been involved or who might have been victims of this serial killer, were officially left unresolved. Yes, but we're talking about Connie's case because not long after, the authorities were not very convinced by the serial killer theory. Connie's case was the one that made the least sense compared to the other victims, even though there were many similarities. The victims were attacked in their homes, even in the case of the entire family that had been murdered. In Connie's case, she disappeared, but he didn't murder her. Nothing happened to her husband who was in the house. It also didn't make sense that Nathaniel, the serial killer, had any kind of relationship with Connie. It wasn't his modus operandi, because remember that the killer would have sent this letter. And besides, Connie's case was in Lockport, while the other cases happened more than 500 kilometers away in the same state, but very far from the area that Nathaniel used to frequent with his family. Why was it believed for a while that Nathaniel Codd could be involved in Connie's case? And was this because Nathaniel had ties to that area? It had to do with Lockport, because he came to live very close to that place and he was seen in Lockport for years. Nothing else was known until Connie's family started to notice certain strange behaviors in Dale, Connie's husband. At the beginning of 1985, almost a year after Connie's disappearance, Dale filed for divorce, and in June 1985 he married his lover, Donna Fure. Not only did they get married, but Donna also started living in the same house where Connie had lived with Dale before the disappearance. With this new information, in December 1987, the authorities decided to interrogate Dale again, which is when he gave his new statements. They started to have inconsistencies, and we have to say that they were minor inconsistencies, but they were still inconsistencies. In this interrogation, 3 years after the disappearance, Dale said that on the morning of February 18, February 1984, he was awake making breakfast for his daughters when the phone rang. In his first statement, he had said that the phone had woken him up. If you remember, another comment he made was that she had taken half of her clothes. He no longer said that she only took her dresses. He also stated that at that time Connie was very stressed because of the daughters, and that at one point he had confessed to Connie that he was having an affair with Donna, although there were inconsistencies. They couldn't do much, so they decided to keep an eye on him. But the truth was that there was nothing new in the investigation. The family felt that they had lost an important pillar for them. They remembered Connie as an adventurous girl who loved riding her bike with her 3 sisters. They all grew up in the city of Wasteland, in the state of Louisiana. Connie went from being an adventurous girl to a responsible, quieter woman who was always very kind and made others feel safe. They met at school, became a couple, and when they reached adulthood, she decided to say yes. Her daughters became her everything. Seeing her feeling down in recent months wasn't normal for her, since she was considered a happy woman who loved her life as a wife and also as a mother. In February 1991, he sold the residence where he lived with Donna and where he spent his married years with her. And then, a woman named Jose bought this residence, and this woman would later sell the house again to a family with the last name Knight. And this was in November 1991. And here is where the interesting part of this case begins. And how did they figure out who the culprit was? The bank that lent the money for the purchase of the house asked the Knight family, the new buyers, to replace the residence's sewage system. And Dale, who was the first owner of the house, met with the Knight family and also with a contractor to do that work. He had recommended that they install the new sewage system in a specific area of the yard and avoid digging in a cemented area. Why? Supposedly, according to him, there were tree trunks that were difficult to remove. So the Knight family then decided to install the new system in a completely different area. Sorry that you're hearing the barking, but my puppy is a baby, and I can't make him be quiet. So I think for a few videos you'll hear some barking from time to time. I'll show you later. Or go to my Instagram to see Felipe. On November 6, 1991, work began on this new sewer system. And with the machinery that was used, heavy machinery, they ended up breaking part of the cement area in that yard, which, if you remember, Dale recommended they not touch. On November 10th, a Sunday in 1991, Jerry Knight, the husband, was cleaning the yard. And also the debris from this cement area, which is when he came across a jawbone from a skeleton. He didn't report it to the police. Yes, he wanted to make sure it was a human jawbone because it could have been from an animal. So he took this to a Y who was a doctor. This relative Y said he should take the piece to a pathologist to confirm if it was from a human skeleton, because he did believe it was. So Jerry did this, and after a few days in the lab, it was confirmed that it was the jawbone of a human skeleton. Jerry then called the authorities to report it. And so, a team of agents carried out the excavation, confirming more remains that belonged to Connie Gaudet. Obviously, due to the time that had passed, and because only the skeleton was found, there was no way to confirm the cause of death. The complicated thing about this case, and it's also a story that's studied in universities because of its complexity, was that finding the remains in the house, which no longer belonged to Dale, was considered circumstantial evidence. In the trial, it had to be proven that Dale buried the body parts in the residence, and there was no way to prove this because there was no other evidence. There was also the risk that the trial could be thrown out because one of the pieces of evidence presented was the voice stress test that was given to Dale. This is a test similar to a lie detector test, which is not accepted in trials because it lacks scientific evidence. There was also another strange situation. Donna Forret, the new wife, had heard something that she later mentioned when testifying. And by the way, by the time Donna testified, they were no longer married but had divorced in 1988. Dale's defense said that this nullified spousal privilege, according to the penal code. But what happened at that moment was that apparently Donna heard this while she was pretending to be asleep. Apparently it was a phone call that he was having with someone, and he was talking about his ex-wife. We don't know exactly what was said in this call, but that doesn't mean it was related to the murder. It could have been a statement that later wouldn't match Dale's previous or new testimonies.
Voz o nuevos de Dale con la policía.
Because of that situation, since it wasn't a direct communication between husband and wife but rather Donna overheard it by chance, so to speak, the judge determined that the testimony could be accepted. Now, in the same way, despite the mistakes, the complexity of the case, and the circumstantial evidence, the jury decided that by putting together that circumstantial evidence, they could reject the hypothesis of innocence that Dale and his team were presenting. And so, fortunately, they convicted Dale of second-degree murder, sentencing him to life imprisonment with hard labor, without the possibility of parole. And the hard labor part surprises me, but I imagine that back in the 1980s it was something normal. This case is among the most inconclusive we've handled due to its nature. We don't know the motivation. The most obvious motivation was that Dale wanted to get rid of his wife to start a new relationship with Donna. And if this was the real motivation, how could it be that Donna, who as far as we know was never involved, could start a relationship with a man who possibly murdered his ex-wife? Because when you look at this story, let's be honest, even though it was thought that it could have been the serial killer, everything pointed to Dale. He was allegedly the only person to communicate with Connie after she disappeared. No one else. Connie, who was a woman who loved her family, who had an excellent relationship with her parents and her sister. And at what point do you finally, so to speak, come down from that cloud? One of those situations where being in love blocks a person's common sense, because over time, everything became more obvious. Dale was the one who came up with the serial killer theory and stuck with it even when the authorities dismissed this idea. Donna decided to end the relationship in 1988, that is, 4 years after Connie's disappearance. And even though we don't know the reason, I want to believe it was because of what happened that year. She became convinced that Dale was responsible, because after this was when Donna revealed many details that led to Dale's conviction, which also makes me believe that she knew all of this. Now, even though we don't know the content of these statements, it makes you wonder why she didn't speak up earlier. The only thing I can understand is that maybe she was afraid of him. And if she spoke up, she'd probably end up like Connie. And if that was the situation, obviously all you can do is understand why and put yourself in her place. You're with a partner, you find out they killed their ex, obviously that could make a person afraid. You guys, for example. If something like that happened to you, if you found out that a current partner killed their ex-girlfriend, what would you do? Would you act like Donna? Would you report it? Right away. And I hope you don't say you'd protect them. That's all.